Here we have a device that I developed. It's my second version of my device that I had developed over at EarthingLife.info, and it's not yet fully developed. I'm going to have to make some changes on it, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. Here inside this box, I've got connected to this earthing bed sheet this device in line with my grounding line that goes to the grounding rod outside. So if I were to take out this box, in order to do so, I'd have to disconnect this lead here, which goes to my earthing bed sheet, and this lead here, which goes to the grounding rod. So let's focus. Okay, this goes to the grounding rod outside, and this lead goes to my earthing bed sheet. So this is literally in between. So there's a pass-through right now. There's continuity internally between this and this lead, between these two leads. So I do measure some resistance. It's very little, but so there's a connection between the two, connectivity. So if I took this out, I'd be breaking the line, my single line connection to the grounding rod outside. Now what's in there are two toroids, much smaller than this, and they're wound similarly, one clockwise, the other counterclockwise, sandwiched one on top of the other, and the whole entirety is covered with aluminum foil. Now what I suspect what I was doing in that first version is something similar what I tried to do here. I tried to remove the capacitance from the floating plate of aluminum foil surrounding those two toroids, and do something off to one side that maybe would be more efficient because it would be more voluntary, more willful, more obvious. And I failed because the hookups are all wrong. Now what I have here is a stack of how many is it? Well, I've got two capacitors interleaved with an extra floating plate in between. And they're homemade. They're made out of glass plates from picture frames, 5x7. And the dielectric, so to speak, is bare glass, while the contact plate, or what would have been the metal plate, is bare glass with aluminum foil on either side, sandwiching that bare glass, and that sealed off with masking tape. And that becomes my contact plate, even though it's got dielectric on the inside. And so I have a dielectric on the two outer sides, the top and the bottom, and then I should have 5? Yes, 5, because I got two leads there, that would be 4, and then the floating plate in the middle is 5. 5 plus 2, that should be 7 plates altogether. No, wait. No, that's not true. 5 contact plates, which means I should have 6 bare plates, making 11 altogether. Anyway, whatever it is. So I have 2 capacitors plus a floating plate extra because they're interleaved, and then they went off to a quartz crystal over here. So the circuit was all wrong because I forced the connection, I broke the connection. It went through one coil to one capacitor, to the quartz crystal, back to the other capacitor, and back to the other coil, and then out. And that broke the circuit. So what I think should have been done is to simply repeat what I had here, the aluminum foil covering the two sandwiched toroids. You know, these toroids, one was hooked in series to the other. So it was continuity. I had continuity. But here I have broken continuity. So I think what I need to do is wire it so that the capacitance over here is in parallel across the input and output of this pair of coils. So I should wire these coils together in series, and then the input, and then the two outermost leads, you know, one going to the earthing bed sheet and the other going to the grounding rod. One of those goes to one of the leads leading to the capacitor, and the other capacitor lead goes to the other lead on the pair of coils, so that it's straddling. The capacitance is straddling these two coils. And that, I think, would be equivalent to what I have over here is just a floating shell of aluminum foil covering its two toroids that are sandwiched together and wired in series, one counterclockwise and one clockwise wound. They're smaller, what's in the box, and these, the smaller one I bought at the hardware store, they're floor flanges, basically. And the floor flanges here are zinc plated iron, but these are not plated with zinc. But I covered them because they had a powdery, it came off on your fingers. It just had the bare carbonized iron or whatever it was, the steel. It came off, so I wrapped it with electric tape to seal it before wrapping it, the coil of wire around it. And I think this wire is copper-clad aluminum, if I'm not mistaken. Well, this wire is just plain copper. They're both 18 gauge. This is audio wire I decided to try out. Anywho, whether or not that's a factor that might make it worse or better or neutral, I don't know. But the wiring of the capacitor. So what I've learned from this, the point of this video, let me back up here. The point of the video is, what is an umbrella capacitor? And so I was trying to imagine what is the consequence of having an umbrella capacitor, such as what was the case with the EV Gray motor, in which both plates were floating. And the dielectric was the air being flushed out on the interior and the Teflon coating on the inside of the chassis and the insulation surrounding the aluminum struts or supports, supporting, I believe it was the rotor coils, while the stator coils were on the interior of the chassis, which makes the chassis coils or stator coils part of the chassis plate and the rotor coils part of the strut floating plates. That means that since the rotors are playing off of the stators, or if you prefer to say the stators playing off the rotors, you know, they're counterpoising each other. What that means is that the same thing is happening with the capacitor, and if we imagine these two coils being, one being the rotor and the other being the stator, the interplay between them is equivalent to this single line connection that I have that's going from one coil to the other, which means if I want to duplicate the effect of the EV Gray umbrella capacitor, for lack of a better word, that's what I'm calling it, because it totally surrounds the entire device, the equivalent would be to straddle the connections of a singular capacitor across the outside of all of these coils, so that one capacitor plate is connected to the supply, to the outermost side, the inlet side, let's say, of one coil, and the other capacitor plate is connected to the outlet side of the other coil, if you get my drift. Now that's because there's only two connections on both these toroids, because they're connected in series, so that means two of their leads are already occupied, and the two remaining leads, one of each, only has room for two plates of a capacitor. Now I had room for more than that. Why is that? Well, thematically, I have everything sandwiched. If we laid it out schematically, one coil would be here, a capacitor, the quartz crystal, capacitor, and a coil of wire. But that doesn't account for all the leads. Oh, yes it does, because it comes in. No, it doesn't. Yes, it does. No, it comes in through one lead of one toroid, comes out the other side, comes into one lead, or one plate of a capacitor, comes out the other side, goes to the quartz crystal, one end, comes out the other end of the quartz crystal, goes to one plate of capacitor, comes out the other plate, comes in one side of the toroid, comes out the other side, and then continues on. So that's the layout. It's just all very linear. but it's a broken continuity. So I think that's the way I need to do it, is to have just one capacitor straddle. Oh wait, no, I don't have to do that. Oh, I know what I'll do. To make use of all my parts, my two capacitors and my quartz crystal, I just won't use the floating plate in between, unless I want to stack them. See, the connections are one thing, but the stacking of the plates is something else entirely, and I want phase lock to happen among all the plates, so I'm going to keep them stacked. It's just the wiring that's going to be different, that's all. So, the wiring will be thus. Each capacitor will straddle each toroid, and the quartz crystal will straddle the whole thing. That's what I'll do. Yeah, I think I like that idea. It makes sense, because I got 3 capacitors basically over here, and 2 toroids over here, so that gives me 3 options on how to connect a capacitor to these 2 inline or in-series toroids. So that makes sense. So I'll have this set up in a better way, because, you know, I take it by experience. I test these things out on my body to see if I get any results at all. And if I don't, then I screwed up. And if I can make any improvement, fine. And generally speaking, the more components or types of components you add to an earthing sleep experience, the better off you are. It's just a question of, well, how do you wire it in? Because you're on an open line. That kind of makes it confusing, because it's not your normal circuitry where you have a closed circuit, you know, and you got a battery source. Now in the bed, it was fairly easy, because here it is. I took my sleep circuit from Dr. Becker that he uses for healing wounds, and added in extra resistance to make 6.6 gigaohms of resistance on my AA battery. And then to make it work, I had to short it out. Across the bed sheet, so that I receive absolutely no amperage, but there's very little amperage that I'm actually shorting through the bed sheet. Just 200 picoamps, more or less, because of the 6.6 gigaohms in series with the AA battery. So I already have one circuit in here, and that's helping. That's helping. In addition to the fact that the earthing bed sheet is grounded to a grounding rod outside. So I just had to figure out how to deal with a earthing amplification circuit, and in its simplest state, that one works very nicely because it's just 2 coils wrapped with aluminum foil. So now I'm going to remove that and have 3 capacitors, not just one floating plate, 1/2 of a capacitor, which I suppose in the old days they actually called that a capacitor, but when you had fully 2 plates, they called it a condenser. Talk about confusion over the ages. So now we just have to call it half a capacitor, because we've lost the common use of the word condenser. Oh, how things change to confuse us. It looks like I got some of my plates scuffed up in transit when I was moving. You can see the scuff marks that ripped at the aluminum foil. I might have to rewrap some of them. But the glass is intact. It didn't break. And I have more plates in case... Oh, I have a ton of plates. I bought so many from this hardware store. They had stacks and stacks of these things, and I picked out the nice, clean ones with no chips on the edges. So I got lots and lots of glass plates to make my very ultra-simple homemade capacitor, which does work. I've already tested out that style of capacitor in a biocircuit, and it works out superbly. Although I had much more plates than this in that biocircuit. But I never had any coils of wire. And I have to admit, this is not your normal winding, because it's not magnetic wire. It's just insulated rubber, insulated wire, 18 gauge. I didn't want to deal with magnetic wire. I thought I'd be winding for eternity. It was bad enough just winding this many windings. with thick wire. Maybe it would get better results if I had used magnetic wire. It's quite possible. I did want to go to a larger size toroid, and that does seem to make a difference. So I got these online rather than going into the hardware store, because to find them this big almost requires that you go online. I think they're 9 inches across, while the ones from the hardware store are 4 inches across, something along those lines. And the hole in the center, that's I think 3 inches. That's huge. Now there's one other thing missing, and that's a neomagnet. I found that if I attach a neomagnet to one of the coils, or in between two coils, if I have a pipe coil, that's different. Then I'll have 2 windings on one pipe, one clockwise, the other counterclockwise, and then I'll just attach the neo on the outside after I've wound it. In this case, I guess I'd go down the center, or in between, laid flat, if I had a bar or neomagnet. But it really boosts the effect to have a magnet attached. So that's the other thing, is to rewire this capacitor to straddle, these capacitors, these 3, to straddle the situation over here. And attach a neomagnet to this. I think only one is needed, basically. It's just a question of where to put it, since a bar, I think it's a 4-inch long bar, is a little awkward. If it could be suspended down the middle, maybe that would be good, I don't know. But it really helps, I don't know, there's something about it that really works well. I'm sure the quartz crystal is like, I just had to try it, I couldn't avoid it. A nice one from a Brazilian quartz crystal. So what the hey, what do I know? I haven't done enough experiments with capacitance to know whether or not it would help the circuit at all. I only know that the iron wound with wire really works. My simplest one I started out was just a bunch of nails, 8 nails, 2 to a leg, forming a square, and I wrapped it with iron, vinyl coated enamel, or iron enameled floral wire from the hardware store, and it worked like a charm, even though it was tiny, and even though my bed sheet was not direct or hard coupled to the earth ground, or even to the device that I was testing. It was loosely coupled, or excuse me, my body was loosely coupled to the earth sheet, because I had oxidation on the surface of the silver wires, making it impossible for me to make a connection through that old bed sheet. It was a very old earthing sheet that I had washed too many times. So even under those circumstances, mentally I got the benefit, but physically I was lacking. And I think that's where hard coupling comes into play. It actually helps the body, more or less, while loose coupling only helps the mind. So, I think that's what all I have to say about my latest experiment that I'm going to try doing. Okay. I might as well add that this particular video is a continuation of the series of videos over at EarthingLife.info, which implies that it is relevant to Tesla's trimetal generator, because the whole point of all those video documented experimentation at EarthingLife.info was my second attempt to try to study Tesla's trimetal generator by starting with iron. What is the nature of iron? So I have iron, I've got aluminum, and I've got the copper winding around the toroidal-shaped iron floor flange. A floor flange is something you put on the floor, like in your bathroom, and you want to run or in a building, and you want to put the flange against a wall or a floor or a ceiling, and you want to run a pipe through that hole. You want to cover the hole so you have a flange, and you want to anchor it. So I guess, yeah, in this case it would be the floor. So you want to anchor it to the floor, because if it gets knocked around, you don't want it to move in its position. You want the pipe to be solidly fixed to the floor, the pipe that's coming through the hole in the floor. And you want to cover up the edges of the hole that's oversized that the pipe is coming through. So the pipe goes through the middle of the floor flange, and it creates a kind of a pyramidal effect. In one side of the flange is flat, and the other side, the interior is raised for the pipe. And so putting the electric tape on this creates the appearance of a slope, which really doesn't exist on a floor flange. It's just in and then up. So it makes it look pyramidal, and then so I sandwich it with the two flat sides next to each other, adjacent to each other, and then the pyramidal sides are facing out on both toroids.
You know, I'm going to have to re-examine these coils in here, because now, as I recall, they're not in series in a singular line. They're looped together as a continuous loop, I think. And then I go in series with the loop. Which means I would only need one capacitor here if I did the same thing, because there'd be only one place to put it. Oh dear. That changes everything. If I have this as a continuous loop of two toroids hooked together, then that's the way I gotta go. You know, it's been, 2 years ago since I did those experiments, so I don't know at what point and why I decided not to have the two toroids in series, but to have them as a closed loop instead. I'll just have to take it on faith that I knew what I was doing, that was an improvement over having them in series, because initially I did have them in series. I had a single loop, actually. I had a single coil on a single toroid hooked in series between earth ground and the earthing bed sheet. So that's significant, a closed loop. I'm going to have to take that out of the box and take a look-see.
Okay, so here they are taped together. They're individually wrapped with aluminum foil. Here, let's zoom in. So you can see the edges. They're individually wrapped, but then I wrap both together with packing tape. So here's one. Let's back up again. So here's one inlet, one wire coming in from the outside. That's the connection that goes to the earthing bed sheet. And this one came undone. I had to redo it. That's why I opened up the box, and as you can see the loop, this is the wire coming in, and it's the alligator clip wire, and it intercepts the connection between one of the two connections between the two toroids. And the other one, let's see, where is it? Is this connection goes to ground outside, and the wire comes along here, and it enters into the box here, and then it comes over here and it does the same thing. It has the alligator clip intercepting the other connection between the two toroids. So it's a closed loop, is what I've got. And in between the two, I have one going to earth and the other going to the earthing bed sheet. But it's a continuous loop. So that's what I'm going to have to do with that over there, is make a continuous loop. And then have only somehow, and I'm not sure how, either only use one capacitor or somehow use all three, but I can't see how to do that. I'll just have to think about it. Let me think about it. Well, what I discovered or realized, let's take a look at the output, it's somewhere in the vicinity of 650 kilo ohms of resistance, which half a mega ohm, that's a lot of resistance. And all I did was short out the two toroids with respect to each other. Otherwise, the connections are all the same. The quartz crystal is back where it was. All the connections with the capacitor plates are the same, and their connection to the toroid is the same. And I'm just testing the output one lead and the output of the other, and getting around 640, 650 kilo ohms, because that is a mega ohm. That it's that is a mega ohm there. Yeah, around 650 mega ohm, 0.650 mega ohms, or 600, something on more than 600,000 ohms. That's a lot of resistance. I mean, they're 18 gauge wire. I guess maybe because I'm using clip leads, and that might have something to do with it. And then these connectors here might not be. I did the best I could. I'm not the greatest on circuits. I got these connectors, crimping connectors to crimp on the ends of these wires that I had taken the insulation off. Anyway, so that's how much resistance between these two, very large. So now this thing is set up to operate more like that one. And so now I can put this back in its box and try it out on the bed and see how it feels. Try and compare. Cool. Well, I've got it boxed up, and I'm testing it, and it's got somewhere around 116 ohms going through it of resistance. So I got my two leads coming out, and I got all the bubble wrap inside. So it's gradually climbing, 120 ohms. Alright, good enough.